Welcome to Livid Comics Lair. Tonight's guest is a British-Australian author of supernatural thrillers, horror, and dark fantasy, and also a teacher of Kung Fu. He has published several novels, several novellas, 3 collections, and over 80 short stories in anthologies and magazines in Australia and overseas. He has also published a further 7 novels co-written with American action-adventure author David Wood. He has won 4 Australian Shadow Awards from 8 nominations, and has also been nominated for 7 Ditmar Awards and 8 Aurealis Awards as well. So please welcome Mr. Alan Baxter. Hey, we are live. There you go. Welcome to the show, Alan.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this tonight. I guess it's morning over there, night here. So hopefully we survive into tomorrow as you have. So that'd be a good move, right?
Yeah, it's okay. Tomorrow exists because I'm there.
There you go.
Yeah,
Perfect.
exactly. Yes, we have a comic book that travels through time, so he's got a hold of that device, right? He's a day ahead of us. So
yeah, it's pretty cool talking about the future. I've been to China a couple of times. It was like that too. So yeah, that's a trip. You could kind of pass through a day flying. You lose a day, gain a day, kind of thing. It's a strange travel.
Yeah, if ever I go across the date line, you always have one day that lasts for 48 hours, and then you completely lose an entire day coming back. So it's just
right.
Time is weird now.
That's right.
Yeah.
So we'll hop right into this. I think, John, why don't you start us off with some questions? So we'll get rolling here and we'll have some fun.
Yeah. Well, first of all, again, thanks for coming on. I reached out to you. I've obviously been following you for a bit here. I was saying to Joel, so the first book I read of yours was The Gulp, and I started following you as you were promoting that book. So that's where I learned of your writing, and I've read a few other books since. So I wanted to ask a few questions about The Gulp, though.
Sure.
First and foremost, is there any town or area in Australia that inspired you for The Gulp in particular?
Yes. A few actually. If anybody local will recognize that basically the street layout of the Gulp, the names of the streets and the names of the pubs and things are changed, and there are things in the Gulp that don't really exist, but the general sort of geography of it is based on a town called Kiama on the New South Wales south coast, which is right near where I live. Although the Gulp itself is set a lot further south down the coast, and it's a lot more isolated than Kiama is. Kiama's only like 90 minutes from Sydney. So I kind of based it. I mean, when you've already got street maps and stuff, why reinvent something? So I kind of based it loosely on that layout, just for the shape of the town and the harbour and the lighthouse and all that sort of stuff, because that was easy to draw from.
Yeah.
And Kiama and a lot of Kiama inhabitants are something of a inspiration to the stories as well. But otherwise, it's sort of a gestalt entity of a number of Australian sort of country towns and coastal towns. There's a very specific sort of Australian isolation that happens where you have towns that are sort of far from anything, where you might, a 30-minute drive just to get to the local supermarket and stuff like that. So kind of drawing on that, and also drawing on that kind of Lovecraftian Innsmouth vibe. I mean, I love the weird harbour town vibe that you get from those sort of things. So I was basically combining the Australian isolated town with the Australian coastal town with the weird Innsmouth kind of thing. And so all those things are kind of jammed together. And certain aspects of it, like when I described the pub in the first story in The Gulp, that's based on a pub that's about an hour down the coast from me, which is just this classic Australian coastal town pub. And so other things from, the road that you drive into The Gulp in the story, there's a road that basically exactly like that further south from me that you can travel along, where you're just going along a single lane highway and the trees kind of close over the top, and you're just going in a straight line and wondering what the hell is at the end of it. There's a lot of things like that around. So I took a lot of different bits and pieces like that. So it's all inspired by something. And then when I just needed something more for the story, then that just made it up and dropped it in. So I've been expanding my notes about the Gulp as I go along, because I'm planning to revisit there a lot. I'm writing the second book right now.
I was going to ask that because I missed the tweet. I was too late to it. You tweeted out last week, I think it was, asking people to if they wanted their names as characters in the Gulp too, and I was like, nah. It was like a day later I saw that, but
That was kind of crazy. I got more response to that than I expected. I thought a couple of people go, "Oh yeah, you can use my name," but I just got this flood. So yeah, I just I made a note of that. So basically, I needed for the second story the first volume of the Gulp is 5 interconnected sort of stories that make a bigger story. The second book that I'm working on now is going to be 5 more stories set in the same place and sort of developing some of the same ideas and spinning off new ideas. And so with the second one of those that I'm working on now, I needed names for a fishing boat crew that I could work with. So that's why I put that tweet out there to grab a few names. But now I think I've got names for every character I'm going to need for the rest of the book. But yeah, I mean, you never know. John Durgan might find its way in there yet. So
I'm pretty sure I think I live in the U.S. version of the Gulp, Alan. I'm kind of in a town just like that. It's very strange. I moved away from here 30 years ago, and now I've come back with my family, my children, when I was their age, and nothing has changed. Absolutely nothing.
That sounds familiar. But that's the thing, that's why locations like this are so good for stories, because everybody knows places like this. Everybody's been somewhere where you're like, wow, this is this weird small town. It feels like it's 50 years behind the rest of the country. And it's just got that vibe, and that sort of isolated small town vibe is so specific to place as well. Like an English one or an American one or an Australian one, they're all kind of really similar at their base, but they're all specific to that country or that geography. And so it's fantastic fodder. And I've wanted for a long time, I've wanted a fictional place that I've created that I can go back to tell more stories there and around there. One of the reviewers said, Baxter's found his Castle Rock, which was a fantastic thing to read, because that's kind of the vibe. That's what I want, that place I can revisit for story,
That's awesome.
I think the trench coat guy, it does walk down my street with the slimy dog, so I think that does happen there. So I think I've seen him more often than once. So yeah, like you said, to your point, everybody can relate with some weird small know nothing town like that. So that's great. So.
Yeah, a lot of the characters, because a lot of the time as well, it's interesting when people read and I mention these these strange weird people that inhabit Culpeper. And a lot of them are caricatures of real people that I've seen around near me and in other towns. You see, when you're a writer, you kind of do that. When you see something, we're all the same. We all see the same stuff. It's just writers are different in that we see it and we remember it, and then we sort of churn that into story. Yeah. So a lot of those characters are people that I've seen and just gone, that's a great character. And I just sort of caricaturize them a little bit, just kind of emphasize the weirdness or whatever. But it's really strange the amount that people really want more, and like the weird guy with no nose in a trench coat walking a slimy dog. It's just this weird character that cropped up, and so many people are like, who's that guy, what's his story, what's going on? They want to know more about that. And it was like, oh wow, okay, all right. So I might have to develop his backstory.
Does he pop back in book 2? Spoiler alert, does he come back, or can't say yet?
He has in the first story, there's another passing interaction with him. So yes, he will appear again. Nice. And I do plan, he's just one example of one of the characters that people just are really interested in. So I'm gonna sort of bleed out a little bit more of his backstory through the course of book 2 as well. But this is the thing with this kind of storytelling and this kind of environment, and with so many characters, there are always going to be people that appear in the stories that some folks are really going to want to know more about, but I'm just like, that was just a dude passing by, like this. And then other people, there are, they are mentioned because there will be more story about them. So it's kind of impossible to keep up with all the bit players in a town setting,
Yeah.
But yes, the noseless guy is making a comeback in book 2. Only small, only little, but he's featured again. So yeah.
Nice. That's awesome. Everybody loves a slimy dog, so that's good.
yeah, exactly.
So I don't want to spoil anything for anyone that hasn't read it yet, but from all your fans and all the social media interactions, are there any of the stories that you get feedback from the most, as far as ones that they enjoyed the most out of the 5? Or
well, it's interesting because so when I wrote the book originally, there were 2 stories that I really wanted to write, 2 particular stories, and and that I built the rest of the collection around. And one of those stories was Mother in Bloom, which is the second story in the book about these. It's basically about these two teenagers, and their mother dies, and they basically try to cover up the death in order to be free of social security and everything else, and just to be left alone, keep the house, keep the social security checks coming in, and just pretend their mum's still agoraphobic and at home. And of course, it's the Gulp, so everything goes weird.
That was my personal favorite, by the way. That story, I loved how shit hits a fan and it just keeps getting worse.
Yeah, so, well, thanks. And that's the thing, you see, it seems like that one really resonated. And so it's really interesting how lots of different people will tell me, oh, this one's my favorite, that one's my favorite, and every story somebody has mentioned, I like this one the best. But that one, I think Mother in Bloom, is probably the one I've been told most often. After that is probably 48 to Go, about Dace Claringbold and his big debt he has to pay off, and the lengths he goes to try to get the money for that is probably the second most mentioned story. So yeah, it's everyone has different favorites, and I think that's the beauty of this kind of storytelling, is that people vibe with different aspects of a thing, so they enjoy all the stories. And it's the same with everything, you know. You can read any number of novels and there'll always be one you're like, oh man, I really feel that one, because it reflects something back to us that's a bit more personal, I think.
Yeah, I think what I enjoyed about it was how there are different themes, like different types of horror in each, but they all relate to each other. Like, it's just so cool how, you know, that obviously we know how Mother in Bloom goes, but then, you know, some of the other stories, they're completely different atmosphere as far as the type of horror, if you will. So I just found that really cool that that they had different types of themes, but they all tied together still in the same town. Sorry, Richard, I didn't mean to cut you off.
That was kind of the idea, is that I love to play around with genre and with theme and stuff like that. And so, you know, there's body horror in there, there's crime in there, there's weird horror, there's, you know, and having one place that links those things together is good, because they are all interconnected anyway, really. All those kind of vibes, they all play well together. And it makes it interesting. And I'm doing it again with the second one, trying to make sure, you know, the stories are all set in and around the Gulp, but I'm drawing on different kind of feels and different sort of, they're all basically this dark, weird sort of cosmic horror genre, but with other influences coming in. Like the first one is this weird, creepy horror set in the town. The second one is at sea with a fishing boat crew. Then, you know, and so there's going to be different angles coming at it all the time, and hopefully that's good for readers, like you say yourself, and also it's good for me because I just get to exercise all these different kind of muscles in terms of genre and style.
Alan, I know you're a great comic fan, and you have cited a few of the good ones in one of your interviews. And I was searching around. I wanted to find any comics by you, and I didn't find any. Does that mean that you haven't written anything on that format, or I'm just a bad searcher?
No, you're not a bad searcher. No, I haven't. My sort of my story influence is very much from reading novels and short stories, but also probably equally from movies and from comic books. I just grew up with all those media and sort of loved them all. And a lot of the time, people will often sort of tell me that my writing is very sort of cinematic and very graphic, and because I have that sort of influence. And I think it's the comic book and graphic novel and movie influence that does that. So yeah, while that's been a huge influence, I haven't actually had the opportunity to write any comics yet. I would really be interested to do it. It would be good fun to do that, to write some and to potentially adapt some of my stuff for a graphic novel or something. You know, those sorts of ideas are always on the agenda somewhere, but I guess it's one of those things where other people and other things have to come together to make that happen. But yes, you're not a bad searcher. I haven't written any yet, but I would like to.
All right. If you change your mind in the future, like Livid is here, and we are, you know, catching up steam, and probably in a couple of years we'll be able to maybe hire you for that job?
I'm up for it. I'd be into it, that's for sure. I'd love to do it. It's a sort of a style, and I'd love to write screenplays, and would love to write comic script as well. It's something I'd be keen to do. It would be good fun. So yeah, I'm up for it.
Yeah,
Rue would make a killer. The Rue would just look awesome on visuals.
Yeah. I've had people always say to me, "Oh, this would be a great movie, or this would be a great series." There's the Alex Kane trilogy, which is three novels of real sort of weird, dark urban fantasy, and people are always saying this would be a great Netflix series, and I hear it all the time. And I couldn't agree more. And producers, please call me. But I probably hear that more about the Rue than anything else. But I think that in some ways that's because the Rue is basically a creature feature. It's Jaws or Cujo or Razorback just with a kangaroo. So, and it's a novella. It's like 120 pages, which is basically a movie script anyway. So, yeah, it's yeah, there it is. Look, yeah, it's kind of almost designed to be a movie in a way, and I was very much inspired by those great creature feature movies when I wrote it. So I remembered when I first started writing it, I remembered watching Razorback, and I hadn't seen Razorback for probably 20 years. And in my mind, I was like, I want to make this kind of weird, gritty Ozploitation thing, a bit like Razorback. And I was tempted to watch it again before I started writing, and I deliberately decided not to because I didn't remember it very well, and I didn't want to be overly influenced by it. So I was like, no, I'm just going to sort of roll with the vibe of that, and I'm just going to write the book. And then after I'd written it, I then went and watched Razorback again, probably for the first time in 25 years. And fuck me, man, that movie is just nuts. It's insane. It's more bizarre and wild than I even remembered from when I watched it all that time ago. And I watched it when I was still living and having grown up in the UK. I watched that in England before I'd ever been to Australia. So that's probably why it bent my brain as much as it did at the time. But yeah, so the Rue is not that outrageous or that weird when you compare it to something like Razorback.
Yeah, so let's hop over to tell us a little bit about your
buff. So
I think we're breaking up a little bit, I think.
I got a delay, guys. I'm sorry.
Yeah, John's a little wonky there. Yeah, I was just going to say, Alan, if you wouldn't mind, tell us a little bit about Kung Fu and what got you interested in that path and what led you into becoming a teacher of martial arts and Kung Fu.
Yeah, it's a weird thing because in some ways it feels just like something that I've always done, just because it's since I was a little kid. But it really started when I went back in primary school. I was getting bullied and getting pushed around a bit. And, it's the sort of thing that so many kids go through. And my dad used to do judo when he was a young guy, and he was like, there's nothing quite so effective as just grabbing a bully and slamming him on the ground and walking away, because sometimes that's all that will kind of get through to someone. So why don't you go and do some judo? And I was like, yeah, okay, well, why not? And just down at the local community centre, just sort of the next village over from where I was growing up in England, was a judo class. So my dad signed me up for that, and I did that for a couple of years, and I really enjoyed it. Apart from getting some confidence to not get pushed around so much, I just really enjoyed the training and the discipline of it all. So I did that probably for a couple of years, and then the teacher said to us that this class is going to finish because he was moving away. Said, but don't panic. Come to the same place, same class, same time each week. A new teacher is going to take over. Okay, fine. Well, that's all right. So then a month or so later, when he'd gone, a new teacher took over, but it turned out this new teacher was a karate teacher, not a judo teacher, which is a bit of a diversion.
Right.
And so I did about a year or so of karate with that guy, and was like, this, I don't like this. This doesn't fit me. This isn't my kind of vibe. And I was 11 years old or something, so I didn't really have much of a sort of mental understanding of what I was doing or why. I just didn't enjoy it like I used to enjoy the judo. But at the same time, I was a huge fan of the Monkey TV show, the Japanese production of the Chinese story, Monkey Magic, and the band and the and all that. That was fantastic, and I loved the stick fighting in that show. And so I was like, so I do martial arts and I do karate, and it's nothing like that. What's that? And so I started basically trying to figure out what I was watching, and it was confusing because it was a Japanese show with Japanese actors, and so you think karate is linked to it, but although it is a Japanese production, it's telling a Chinese story, and in that show they're doing kung fu. So that was what made me go, oh, okay, so maybe it's kung fu that I want to do. Maybe that's what I like. So then I went and found a local kung fu class and started studying that. And it was like, okay, yes, this is what I've been looking for. This is the thing that I want to learn. And I stayed with that school probably, I can't remember now, but I stayed with that school probably 6 or 7 years at least. And then by the time I was in my sort of late teens and going a bit wild and everything else, as tends to happen at that age, I sort of dropped out of it a little bit for a year or two. And then when I went to go back and get back into it, I found a new school and a new teacher, and then discovered. So I've, over the long story short, ended up doing a few different styles. But then when I moved to Australia, I discovered the school and the style that I'm doing now. So what was that? And that was 96 or something. And so when I discovered that teacher, after all the different things that I'd done and all the things I'd experienced, I finally found this teacher and this style. And it was like, it was like coming home, like going into that training hall is okay. Of all the things I've been looking for and doing, I finally found this is what I've been looking for all along. And I've been with that teacher and that style ever since. And now I'm a disciple. There's one of 17 disciples in the world of that guy. And I run my school down here. I ran the Sydney school for a while on his behalf. And then when I moved down the coast from Sydney, I set up my school down here.
Yeah, that's awesome. What mental disciplines from martial arts do you think translate and carry over into your writing? Maybe positively, just could be focus. I'll let you run with that. So what do you think that you learned that you may have been able to I guess transpose onto your writing technique and style?
Well, I mean, all of it really. It's the writing is an art, and martial arts are an art. They basically follow that same pattern. You have to be able to commit the discipline to do it. You have to put in the hours and the work to be able to sort of excel at something. You have to constantly strive to be better. You have to sort of pay attention to what's going on around you and learn. You have to make it a part of your lifestyle to start internalizing all the lessons that there are. So there's nothing about the martial arts that doesn't correlate to an equivalent sort of thing with writing, and vice versa. And it happens on Twitter sometimes when I'll tweet something and I get a bunch of replies going, "Oh, is he talking about kung fu or writing?" And it's like usual replies, well, both if you like, because it is a bit. And yeah, it's more than anything really. I think that basic understanding that regardless of how much natural ability you may or may not have, any success comes from just busting your ass. You've got to turn up frequently. You've got to do the work. You've got to keep doing the work. You've got to continually strive to be better, and you've got to have the discipline to keep doing that in the face of failure and whatever else. So, I mean, I think, to be honest, that's the primary thing that comes through any art, really. You want to learn to play the guitar, or you want to get good at gymnastics, or you want to be a painter, or any of those things. Even if you're quite natural to it and quite good at it in the first instance, it takes a lot of dedication and bloody-mindedness and stubbornness to just keep doing it, because you can always get better. And I think it's one of the things I love about Kung Fu and writing. It's not something you ever finish. There's not some point where you go, okay, now I can do that. You can get to a point where potentially at any of those things, you could be one of the best in the world at that thing, whatever it might be, but you can still get better. You're only ever in competition with yourself, and you're always just striving to improve yourself and improve your impact on the world with what you do. And the fact that it's not something that can ever be finished and you can just always strive to be better, I find incredibly motivating. So yeah, that's why it appeals to me, I think.
I mean, first of all, do I have a delay still, guys? Do I still have a delay?
Sounds okay, but
your lips are moving a bit like a Shaw
like,
Brothers movie because we can hear
yeah,
you.
you look like you're in a
lips are
kung fu
moving
movie.
behind.
You look like you're in the kung fu movie. It works out well.
It's
So.
point, man.
We have thunderstorm clouds here, if you
Daniel.
guys can hear me, and it's making my internet all messed up. So we'll try to get this fixed here.
No worries, rip it.
This is usually me. This is usually I live among dairy paddocks in the middle of fucking nowhere, so it's normally my internet that's unstable and cutting in and out. So it's quite nice not to be that guy this time.
The people watching, this is global. So Alan's in Australia, Rogério's in Brazil, and we're on the East Coast near Boston in the United States. So this is a global podcast. This is crazy. So God bless technology. Yeah, we're all over the planet tonight. So God bless technology. Right? It's awesome.
I just realized
we lost John again.
I was mute.
It's okay.
All right.
We lost you.
Oh, okay. I have some kind of this is a kind of a buggy question. Like there's the whole thing about the writer's block, and every writer has a different answer to it, and it's a very common question. But from my point, maybe it's not so common because nowadays we have a lot of different substances. I would say like anthogenic. I don't know, but like some people in the United States, mostly that in the people work for Apple, Google, they microdose on psilocybin, and they claim that works for keep them more creative and keeping the flow for longer. And have you ever tried that or anything similar to that when you felt that you were going to a kind of a block? And if you did, can you tell me how that was? And if you don't want to talk about it, I'm all right, because just skip it. Going to the next question.
No, that's cool. In terms, I don't really believe in writer's block as actual writer's block. I usually think that when something like that's happening, it's usually a situation where the story's gone in a certain way and you're sort of stuck and you don't know where to go. And often if you just back up and restart, you might find that you find a different path. Oh, okay, that's what I wrote myself into a corner there and it wasn't working. That's what I needed to find out. A lot of the time it can be just because you're too deep in something. And if I get really stuck and I can't move forward, I'll go out. I'll take the dog to the beach for an hour and have a walk and some fresh air and just let my hind-brain tick over. I ride a motorcycle. Sometimes I find that going out for a ride for an hour is really useful because you have to concentrate on the road, but your subconscious just gently sort of ticks over. And I usually find that those things sort of deal with any form of writer's block or being stuck on something. Usually it's just as simple as moving away from it for a little while. I've never sort of used psilocybin or anything in that respect. I've casually over the years experimented with all sorts of different things here and there. I spent a period of time having a lot of fun with that stuff, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend to anyone. But it was a period I went through that was certainly an interesting period in my life. So I've got nothing against it, but I've never actively sort of tried to use it creatively. More just for playtime, if you like. I play guitar not very well, but one of the things that I missed the most from sort of previous life was when I played in a band. I really miss making music with other people. And there was a period of time then where we would get through an awful lot of weed when we were playing and writing music. So in that sort of inspirational sort of point of view, from the music side of things and my life playing gigs and playing with bands, there was certainly some creative influence there, I think, but I think that's probably as far as it's ever gone for me in terms of creatively. I was reading something recently where a few people are talking about, like you said, microdosing with psilocybin and stuff like that. It's an interesting idea, and I often wonder whether it kind of opens up your natural creativity or kind of redirects what would otherwise be your natural creativity. I think it's an interesting concept is it's like, does it open up what's really you, or does it create a different you that would be sort of different to what you would do otherwise if you were just relaxed and writing what you wanted to write anyway, or creating what you wanted to create. I think it's a really interesting area of study, but yeah, not something I've done or really have plans to do. I tend to, these days, as much as I tend to do, is a good single malt whiskey. So
I can second that. That's a good. That's a good.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a cigar whiskey guy, so that's okay.
Yeah.
You know, it's only because it's 10 o'clock in the morning that I don't have a whiskey now, like we mentioned earlier. I normally would be sitting here with one of an evening, but
I'll catch you on our morning sometime. We'll do a morning show with you, and we can do a whiskey show. We'll just talk about whiskeys.
Whiskey in the morning is heavy. You got to get a beer.
Yeah. I mean, I would probably do it anyway, but I have to teach tonight, so it's best not to start drinking at 10 in the morning when I have to
Alan
teach.
Goes hard. He goes hard. So.
Yeah. Can you please tell me, is my delay fixed?
Yes.
It sounds fine, buddy. You're good.
Oh my God! I'm like, I was going crazy. I like so much I wanted to say, and like, yeah. Well, I could hear everything. I just can't talk. So,
I did that on purpose because we didn't want to see you. I turned you off. So.
Yeah. So. I'm gonna drop a disclaimer for you guys. Like tonight, I'm gonna let John talk, because last week I was the fun boy and I couldn't let anybody ask any questions. But tonight you are all right, John. This is your night.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah. We had one of Rogério's inspirations of drawing on last week, so he was very chatty. So, but it's all good.
I couldn't help it.
I wanted to ask a question back when we were talking about when you were giving advice to people trying, when they're doing anything, right? Like whether it's karate or writing, you just got to keep trying. So, and I had read, like, even to this day, you said you still have stuff that gets turned down from people when you write it, and it's a huge inspiration to someone like myself that's an aspiring writer, obviously, and a lot of people watching are indie writers, right? So to hear that from someone that's had success, just keep grinding. I wanted to say that when you mentioned that earlier, because it's
always the bottom line. You just don't quit. The only difference really between published and unpublished writers is that the published ones didn't quit. Is anyone can get good enough. Some people are gonna potentially get to be outstanding. Other people are just going to get to be pretty competent. They just write good stories regardless. It doesn't matter, because we've all read stuff that we thought was crap. But other people like it, and that's great. We've all read stuff that we thought was just absolutely mind-blowing, and it's like, why don't more people know about this? Because there's so much luck in publishing, regardless of how good you are. Anyone who denies that is either lying to you or just really lucky, and they just haven't realized sort of how lucky they've been. Because the right manuscript is one thing, but at the right time to the right editor and this, that, and the other. And then if it gets published, finding the audience is another stroke of luck. If enough people talk about it when it comes out and it gets some momentum, you're in this gig long enough. We've all had books that come out that you're really proud of and really excited about, and then it's like, what the fuck happened there? Like, that's just not selling and nobody seems to know about it. And oh my God, that's a great book. There's no rhyme or reason to it. If there was any sort of understanding of it, then publishers would be making bestsellers all the time, because they would know the formula, but there isn't one. And there's a handful of people whose name just sells. If Stephen King puts out a book, it's going to sell. Neil Gaiman puts out a book, it's going to sell. There are people whose names will just sell. For vast majority of us, even if we've got something of a following, that's just not the case. My sort of acceptance rate is still probably 10-20%. Most of what I submit out there gets rejected. And there's a handful of places that I have a good relationship with that will publish me pretty much all the time. But, as is the case with this sort of a gig, you're always striving for something and more, striving for something a bit bigger, a bigger publisher with a bigger distributor, purely in the hope of getting either a bigger advance, but more importantly, a bigger readership, exposure to a bigger audience through the back of that publisher's distribution or whatever. So always striving for more, because at the end of the day, a writing career is successful with readers. If you have enough readers, then you have you know, a good career going on. So for me, anything new is always the idea of where can I place this where I'm likely to get the most readers and get the most attention. And that means initially submitting to the sort of places who are almost certainly going to reject it, because they've got their pick and choose of who they want, and they've got a limited, you know, number of slots of things to publish. But it's part of the gig. As somebody once said, which a long time ago, when I was not exactly first starting out, but when I was fairly new, somebody said, rejection is the default. So all the time you operate on that assumption, you realize that the acceptances that you get are when you kind of disrupt the default, and that's what you strive for. It's like fishing. Most of the time you sit on the bank like an idiot, just doing nothing. Every once in a while you get a bite. It's a bit like that, you know, until you've got one of those names that just sells anything, which most of us don't. You're always going to be doing that, and you're always playing for those moments, those interruptions to the default, which is rejection. And the more you do it, hopefully the more frequently those things happen, because you do start to develop that name, and publishers as well as readers as well as whatever start to recognize you, and you get more opportunities. But it just comes off the back of working your ass off and being rejected most of the time.
Yeah, I mean, so I remember you gotta have thick skin too, right? Like the first short story I ever tried to submit, it got rejected, but they basically typed up a whole paragraph, you know, talking about the story and how they were thinking of it when they were on the beach and this and that, and it just didn't fit what they were looking for in that particular anthology. And so when I was telling another writer that, they're like, man, you should just be happy they even said that to you. Like the fact that you got that much response back, like that's take
definitely.
That. So
any personal response is a win, because the vast majority of the time you're going to get a form rejection.
Yeah,
which is pretty normal. Like a lot of these publishers, they process hundreds of submissions all the time. And so the vast majority of what they do is they just, you know, no. But every once in a while, if they see something that it's good enough that they take a moment to say, actually, you know what, this was great, doesn't fit, but thanks, send us something more. It's the next best thing to an acceptance, but it's way more than a form rejection. It's a massive leap up, because no publisher says that stuff unless they mean it. If they're really genuinely not into it, you just get a form rejection. So whenever you do get that kind of feedback, it's absolutely gold, and you should absolutely remember it. And if they say look forward to your next submission, definitely look to write something else for them, because you over years, over the time, you sort of build this reputation where you find that publishers are aware of you and they're sort of quietly paying attention to what you're doing, and then you send something in and they're like, you know what, this was great, but thanks, we don't want it right now. But they remember who you are, and there are these sort of tiers of awareness in the business. And that's that stubbornness coming back in again, because the longer you're around, the more people will see your name, and the more they're like, there's that guy again, you know, oh, now he's in that book, and now he's in that book. And the more they see that, the more they become sort of aware of who you are and the potential that they might want to work with you. It's that there's this idea of social proof, you know, if you put a book out and nobody's buying it, nobody else will buy it. But you put a book out and it looks like hundreds of people are buying it, then a bunch of other people are going, wow, it must be good, so they buy it too. Yeah. It's kind of infuriating, because it's like, well, it's the same book and it's been just as good all along. But until you've got that, which is why I'm constantly saying to people, if you like a book or a story or a comic or a film or whatever, talk about it, tell people about it, even as simple as on Twitter or Facebook or whatever. Just go, oh, wow, I just read this, it was so good. Because the more times that happens, the more social proof that thing gets, and the more likely other people are to pick it up. So it works for the books that you write, but it also works for you as a writer and who you are and the name of who you are. So always, I mean, don't waste your time. I don't understand people who sort of go online and go, oh, I just read this, it was shit. So what? Why even mention it? You know, just forget about it. But if you read something and it was great, definitely go and tell people, because we're hungry for content. Everybody wants to know what's good, because there's so much out there. Mm-hmm. And if 50 people all tell you the same thing is good, you're probably going to take a punt on it, because you're like, well, it seems like it's definitely popular. And it's not that it's any better than anything else. It's just that 50 people took the time to mention how good it was. So that matters. And it matters within the industry, as you know, if you're an artist or a writer or whatever, and your name crops up here and there, you know, people start to pay attention to that. And they also see that you're in it for the long haul. You've been doing it a long time. And so there's obviously a level of professionalism there that they can trust and come to work with. You're not some fly-by-night who's going to do something and disappear again. It's like, this guy's still working. That's good, you know?
Yeah. That's
So
great feedback.
my wife is watching to make sure I behave. So she wants to know if they made an autobiography about you, Alan, and made it into a movie. Would you cast yourself, or would you want to play yourself in that film? And I'm going to add to it. If you didn't, who would you have play you in that film?
Yeah,
That's a hell of a thing, isn't it? And you know what? Quite often you get these questions as well about your books. You know, if this book or this story was made into a movie, who would you cast? And I never know the answers to these things because I can never think of who would be good actors to do it. I can tell you, absolutely, definitely would not be Russell Crowe. Beyond
he's too old
that,
now.
I genuinely don't know. And to be honest, if a lot of the time I like to think of these things, I'd like to see sort of an audition process of unknown actors, find someone that's got some real great talent but who nobody knows, because if they were going to become a character from one of my books, or if they were going to play me in an autobiography, fuck, that would be a boring film. But I would like it to be someone who nobody knows, so that the actor doesn't bring anything to it. Tom Cruise is always Tom Cruise. He's a pain in the ass, so it doesn't matter what movie he's doing. It's, oh god, it's Tom Cruise. Some actors can be real chameleons, you know, and they can really sort of switch and look and feel like completely different people. Good actors can do that. But I don't, I much prefer to think that anything from my pen or from about me would be someone that nobody's ever heard of. And so all they're doing is paying attention to the content and not the person. It's a bit of a cop out of an answer, but it's because I genuinely can't think of who would be good for these things.
She probably knows. She knows every actor and actress. It's mind-blowing. She said, I wish I had a more useful skill set, but she knows all of them. So she'll probably pop up with a suggestion here momentarily. I'm sure that'll happen.
Bring the suggestions on, because casting is a skill, man. And I'd love to see some stuff optioned for my work. And part of the thrill of that, apart from getting to see my stuff on screen, part of the thrill of that would be just seeing who they cast for certain roles and how they get to those decisions, because casting is a talent, man. So it would be interesting.
One of the things that I enjoy too, Alan, is that you're doing a lot of your own reads for your audiobooks. I think a lot of authors miss that, where they hire someone else to do their read of their book. I think that's really cool that you do that. I saw at least a couple videos. Yeah, I saw a couple of videos.
Yeah, I don't read the actual audiobooks myself. Publishers tend to arrange those. There's John Waters has done quite a few of my books, and he's great. Jeff Kafer does quite a few of the books that I do with Dave Wood. But I'm a bit sort of twisted about it. If you're doing a live event or something and you go, okay, I want to have a reading, it's like, oh God. And somebody will sit there and read for 20 minutes and it's too long, it's too much. If you do something like that, I think you read a page or two, just give a little snapshot, a little vibe, and that's good for a live event. But if you want to make, like I do with YouTube or TikTok, I'll do readings where I'll do a bit of a longer reading that people can sit and watch if they want to, kind of thing. And that I enjoy, because it's a good way to give people snapshots in their own time of stories, books, whatever. And I plan to do more of those. I've done a couple from the Gulp. There's a group I've been involved with for a long time called Wiley Writers. And we've just recorded, I read the first 3 chapters of my novel Hidden City. And that'll be coming up on YouTube through Wiley Writers soon. So give people a sort of a bite of that book. And I think that's a good idea. I enjoy doing that. And I enjoy doing those readings because, I get to sort of deliver the story a little bit that way and give people a feel for how I hear it in my head as well. So, but I think it's best to do bite size. If you listen to an audio book and you have a narrator that does the whole book, then that's good. That's their job and they do a good job of it. But otherwise, readers need to bring themselves to books, So, I always have this kind of mixed relationship, with reading and everything. But I love audiobooks. I listen to a lot of audiobooks myself. So, a good narrator can do a fantastic job.
Yeah, I love that format too. And Alan, what happens when you finish a chapter? You just know that it is good. You go and review it many times, or you just leave it there and don't read it for a long time until you go back and see what you've done, what could be improved, or you just know that it is the thing. You're in the flow. What do you do?
Sometimes I just know I've nailed it, but almost always not. I'm I do tend to sort of edit a little bit as I go. Like I'll be working and I'll be like, oh, and I'll just skip back and adjust a bit and then keep going and maybe skip back. But generally speaking, I'm a get it all down first kind of writer. And what I will quite often do when I'm working on a book, I've always got several documents. So I've got the main document, which is the book I'm writing on. I've got another one that are little character descriptions and place descriptions, so I can check back and make sure I'm not changing someone's hair from blonde to black or something, because I've got little notes. Another document will be some sort of key plot points and stuff, because I don't plan in a lot of detail, but I do sort of make notes and have some key beats that I want to hit. And another document that's always open while I'm writing will be like the fix it document, where as I'm writing and I realize something or I write something and go, oh, hang on, I'm not going to need to change that thing. I'll just skip to that fix it document and I'll jot down a note about it, come back and carry on, because I want to always try to be going forward. And I'm very much a believer in the very first thing you got to do is you just got to finish the thing. Angela Slater's a great Australian writer, and she always talks about brain vomit. She says the first draft is brain vomit. You're just like pouring it out straight onto the page because you've got to get this thing down. And for me, that the first draft is me telling myself the story. So I've got it in mind. I sort of know what it is, what I want to do, and I tell myself that story. And then I go back and I make it something interesting that other people will want to read. And I put in all those bits of sort of foreshadowing and all those corrections that make me look clever, like I meant it all along. Certainly until 3/4 of the way through the book, it's like, fuck, that's a great idea. So you write that, make a note, change this at the beginning to make it look like you always meant it. That's the magic sort of behind the scenes that always happens. But I do find that the more I do this, the more I find that first draft is cleaner and cleaner, because, and this was interesting. I was talking to a friend of mine about this recently. In part, I think it comes from staying busy, because I'm working on the second set of stories from the Gulp right now. I've got a finished novel that a friend of mine is beta reading for me that I'm waiting on feedback for. So in the back of my mind, that's ticking over. I'm working on the second set of Gulp stories now. And I also know the next couple of projects I'm going to do going forward. So they're already sort of percolating somewhere, this mess in the brain meat. And I think because staying busy, I'm working on this and I need to get this finished and go, right, that's finished. As soon as I finish a book, I go back and I go through it again immediately, because of all those notes and all those fixes. And I don't pay too much attention, but I just fix the things I knew were going on. Yeah. Then I put it away. I'll leave that alone for a little while and I'll work on the next project and I'll first draft the next thing. So it means I'm always sort of leapfrogging projects like that. But by the time I get to the first draft of a new project, I've kind of been subconsciously churning it over for weeks or potentially months. If I was working on a novel beforehand and it takes me 3 months, 4 months, 5 months to write the first draft of a novel, all that time this other stories are ticking over in my brain as well. So I find that by staying busy and moving from one thing to the next, by the time you get to a thing, your subconscious has already sort of worked a lot of it out, and then when you pour out that first draft, it's a lot more of a complete first draft than it might have been otherwise. Like if I get commissioned for a short story and there's a short window, I don't get a lot of time to just let it percolate before I write it. I have to sort of write it sooner. And those things are always harder to write because you don't have that subconscious churning time. So I find that generally speaking, my first draft now is probably something would have taken me 4 or 5 drafts to get to 5 or 10 years ago. But that's just getting better at the craft. I think, that's just getting better at it. But in short version, edit a little bit as I go, but then put it away and then go back and go through it again. And I'll go through at least 3 complete drafts before anybody else gets to look at it. So
do you think that sculpting would be the right metaphor to your process?
Yeah, a little bit. I find when I do a draft, so the first draft comes out to whatever word length it is. I immediately go back and go through it for all those little bits that I thought of. So the second draft is invariably longer than the first draft, because I tend to add those bits that I want. And as I'm going through, I beef up a little bit of description. I usually beef up a little bit of dialogue, because when you're trying to rush through and get the thing said, it tends to go by a bit fast. And then when you read through it again, you can make it a little bit more natural, add in a few more exchanges, that sort of thing. So the second draft is always a bit longer than the first draft, and then I put it away for a while. But then when I go back and I redraft until I'm happy with it, very much it's like sculpting, chipping away, smoothing out, and it gets kind of progressively shorter and shorter until I've kind of refined it into what I want. So if a novel might be 90,000 words in the first draft, it might be 100,000 words in the second, and it might be 80 or 85 or something by the time I've decided it's, ready for other people to read. So yeah, it is, you sort of, you add the clay on and you smooth it out and then you fine tune it down to what you want. So yeah, I mean, it's a good metaphor.
Yeah, I think. Oh, sorry. Yeah, you can read that. I saw you poke that up earlier.
Yeah, it's all right. I was just gonna jump in real quick. So my wife says off the top of her head, Benedict Cumberbatch comes to mind, like Doctor Strange vibe. He's certainly not an unknown, like you said, right? So
no, that's gotta be all right. If Benedict wants to take on the role, I'd be okay with that.
There you go. And then she had a follow-up question too. She said regarding the awards, is it an honor to just be nominated, or do you honestly want to win? And she's totally okay with you wanting to be a winner.
Man, I want to win.
Yeah.
It absolutely is an honor to be nominated. That's genuinely true. So like to get to the point where maybe there's a short list of 5 works and you're one of them out of all the work that year in that category for that award, that's fucking fantastic. There's no belittling that achievement. That's awesome. But to then actually win it, that's another step up. So yeah, of course, I want that. The Aurealis Awards here in Australia are sort of the premier jury voted speculative fiction awards, science fiction, fantasy, and horror. And I've been a finalist 8 times now in those awards, and I've yet to bring home a fucking trophy, and I want one so bad. So, and it's partly because even like 10 years ago when I first started, it was like, oh, as far as Australia is concerned, it's like, oh man, the Aurealis Awards, that's the pinnacle. And then I started getting nominated for them. I started becoming a finalist. It's like, wow, far out. I can't believe my work is there in that list. And that is genuinely fantastic. But yes, I do also really want to win one as well. But if it really came to it, the thing I really cover is a World Fantasy Award. That's the one that to me is, there's 2 awards really. There's the Bram Stoker Awards that the Horror Writers Association do. It would be amazing to get one of those, but they are also half and half jury and fan voted as well. So there is a certain, whenever you have a fan voted award, like the Ditmar Awards here in Australia or whatever, there's always a certain sort of popularity of fan base that's involved with that stuff, as well as the judging of the work. But when you have awards like the Aurealis or the Australian Shadows or the World Fantasy, where they actually have judging panels who read all the work and choose based on that rather than fans voting for a work, it feels like those sort of awards are the ones that you're really achieving something, because you've got a diverse panel of judges who are really reading everything and picking what they think is the best. And on that front, the World Fantasy Award, it used the trophy used to be the bust of Lovecraft, and understandable why they've changed it now. The new trophy is awesome with the tree and the sort of moon behind it. Looks awesome. But that sort of weird fiction, that crossover of weird dark fantasy and horror that is just my bag, that award has always been so well associated with that sort of genre and that sort of style. And it's the World Fantasy Award, so that's the one I really cover. I've not even been a finalist in that one yet. So even if I got onto any shortlist for the World Fantasy, that would blow my mind. But yeah, bringing one of those home would be incredible. But yes, the short version, being nominated absolutely is awesome, and it's definitely a lot better than not being nominated. But winning is even better. Yeah.
If I could get an Eisner Award, I would consider my career complete. That's the.
There you go. Exactly right.
To your point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But if you're nominated, you won't be, just I hate it. I fuck that. Then you won't.
Nah. And if you are nominated,
well, then but then at the same time, you can put. Oh, sorry, Alan.
No, go on.
I was going to say, if you get nominated, you see a lot of people that, they'll say Eisner nominated artist Joel Van Patten, so you still have that in front of your name at least, so they know you've been in the running. So it's not all lost.
A lot of the time people tend to, they don't necessarily remember who was nominated and who won. but they do remember the names they see associated with awards.
Yeah.
So while there is absolutely that level of sort of kudos and success and everything to say, I won this award, if you are on the shortlist, your name is justifiably associated with that award. And often that's enough. You know, like, you know, Eisner nominated Joel Van Patten or Eisner winning Joel Van Patten. There's a fine line. There's a big difference to us in that, but there's a fine line to what people sort of generally perceive on that. So, you know, I've won 4 awards from the Australian Shadows, but I've been nominated for Ditmar's and Aurealis and other Shadows that I didn't win and stuff like that as well. So it's like, well, is it better to say Australian Shadows Award winner, or is it better to say Australian Shadows, Ditmar and Aurealis Award nominated? You know, and it's like, well, all those things are good. All those things carry weight and show that a variety of people have seen the work and considered it worthy, you know. So yeah, it's a weird, everything about awards is kind of weird.
Yeah, it is weird because
just to make a point of it, somebody who's never been on a single award shortlist might be turning out some of the most mind-blowing work out there as well, because awards are incredibly sort of capricious and subjective, and I know a handful of writers who I think are just outstanding and putting some of the best work out there, who've never been picked up on an award list for who knows why. And you know, there's that much taste and stuff involved. So while it's a cool thing, it's absolutely not necessary for a career, and it's no real indicator of whether you're really that good or not. It's an indicator of you hitting a certain vibe at a certain time, I think.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to make sure that we talked about on the show tonight is your wife's fantastic art that she does on your covers. I know you have some hanging up behind you, so I would
my camera's mixed back.
There you go. Yeah, it's hard with these. Yeah, I'm always pointing. That's, you know, to your right, my left.
That's
right.
One of her paintings there. That's,
yeah. So
she did the Gulp, right? Did she do the Gulp cover?
Yeah. So the cover of the Gulp that you're holding up now.
Yeah.
Yeah. She didn't paint for the cover, but the cover is one of her paintings. It's sort of worth drawing that distinction.
Here we go. I'll put you on full screen. Here we go.
So there's the cover works as a wraparound for the thing, and this is like an ocean pool in Kiama. So I mentioned that you know, one of the inspirations for the sort of geography of the town, to some degree, you know, not the surrounding area, but just the actual town itself, was Kiama, and that was a painting that she did of an area of Kiama. So when it came to it, she's an amazing artist. The work she does is fantastic, and I've long wanted to have the opportunity to use some of her artwork on a book cover. And when it came to the Gulp, it seemed like the perfect opportunity. So we did that. So, and there's working on the next Gulp book now. I'm going to be using another one of her paintings for the cover of that. So hopefully any Gulp stories will always feature her artwork on the cover. So, you know, it's kind of nice to be able to collaborate like that.
Is she charging well? Is she expensive?
Yeah, she's very costly, but entirely worth it. So yeah. But I mean, you can check out her work. Her name's Halinka. It's Halinka. And if you just go to halinka.com.au, she's got a gallery there on her website, and you can see some of the work she does. I mean, this one here is a good example of some of the close work she does. She always does weird, sort of creepy nighttime landscapes, either close-up ones like that, or sort of a bit sort of further away ones like that. And sometimes she's got some really broad ones and some others that are really close in, like just a window or stuff like that. So yeah, very good.
That's really cool. Yeah. We'll share that in our Livid group, our Livid comics group. We have a lot of fine arts fans that follow Joel over to our comic venture here. So we'll share that in our group for sure.
Yeah, I really wanted to merge that whole fine art with comics thing, because the line is so thin between the two, but for some reason people that are into fine art don't do comics, and people that do comics don't do fine art. And it's like, you really should, because there's a lot of great crossover that could be happening with these genres.
And there's a long tradition of the really good painted covers for comics as well, where you have really fine work, especially, I mean, you know, the sort of big names like Fabry and stuff were you know, started developing that, I think, a lot back in the day. But some of the cover. You look at the original Sandman comics that he did with Dave McKean, where he was doing these 3-dimensional artworks and photographing them and stuff like that. They're incredible. I mean, that just those covers alone are incredible art, regardless of the connection to the comic and stuff. So yeah, it's interesting to me that there isn't more of a connection between those things.
Have you pulled inspiration from her art in your stories, or vice versa? Does she read them and then paint something that comes from your story? What does that relationship look like?
Definitely not vice versa. She makes a lot of creepy paintings, but she doesn't do so well with the creepy stories. So she does read most of my work, and then looks at me like, "What the fuck is wrong with you, man?" So
I think my wife does the same too. So that's
yeah. There's a bit of that. Like my second short story collection is called Serve Cold. And she's like, "Nah, I'm not doing it. I'm putting this one down." So, which, you know, I shouldn't be proud of it, but that's something of an achievement. But the more sort of weird stuff like the Gulp or Devouring Dark or stuff like that, then she enjoys those and she reads that stuff, but not really draws inspiration. Her inspiration is more, she really explores that uncanny vibe you get. So you have a place in the daytime that's completely normal and boring and uninteresting, and then when night comes along, artificial lights turn on, so there's stuff here that's brighter than it should be, and that makes shadows over here that are deeper than they should be, and it makes that normally safe, boring place a bit weird and uncanny. And that's always that vibe that she's exploring, is that sort of human influence on the geography, and that uncanny sort of vibe. And so that she explores that. So she doesn't really draw any inspiration from my stories, but I do frequently see her work, and it triggers that sort of, you know, for me it's like, so who's in that shadow, or what's behind that, you know, and that definitely feeds into my story brain. So yeah, I've already got 3 of her paintings put aside for the second volume of stories from the Gulp. So, and I'm trying to decide which one I want to use of those, and then I need to say to her, can I have that one? So yeah, see where that goes.
Yeah, that's very interesting, you know, because there's a relationship between colors and our moods. If you have to establish the kind of, you know, freaky and horror type of mood, you need to have the right colors. Like you don't saturate the colors. Like you have to go dark, have to go black and white, have to go sepia, because it is part of the story. It's like this color is the soundtrack of the comics or of the book. If you have illustrations in it, and every time you pick the wrong colors, you just mess up with your work.
It's true. I mean, my wife's always talking about how much indigo she gets through with the work that she does. And it's fascinating to hear her talk about black, because it's black, but no, it's not. There's so many different types of black. When she works in oil on canvas, and she'll talk about warm blacks and cold blacks and deep blacks, and this with it, you know, it's amazing to me, because I mean, I'm partially colorblind anyway, so a lot of it's lost. But it is quite fascinating to see, and she'll spend so long agonizing over this particular sort of shadow and getting the right black for it. And when she gets it right, it's like, fuck, okay, I get it. You know, I couldn't have done that. I don't even understand what you're seeing there. But now that you've done it, it's like, wow, yeah, that's now correct, sort of thing. So yeah, it's a fascinating process to me. It's like she'll spend 8 hours in the studio working on bricks on a wall, shading bricks, and I can't even really see the difference of her 8 hours of work, but 2 weeks down the line, when the painting's finished, it's like, wow, that's outstanding. And I know that it was 8 hours after 8 hours of that layering and building that does it. I guess in the same way that I'll spend a few months, you know, telling a story with 90,000 words. It's like, it takes a long time to write each sentence, and overall you get a bigger story, but that's how you build, you know.
It's amazing how dark the world really is, and when you're a painter and you start to try to get the right color, you realize that too, because we're so used in our modern world of looking through everything at a screen, right? So it's all going to be on your phone, it's going to be on a computer, it's going to be on a television, and those will artificially bump up the brightness of everything. But if you're looking at something in reality, it's actually really, really dark. So in many ways, she's kind of emulating the truth through that too. So that's another thing
real life
you
doesn't have a backlight,
fine art world too.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. This is a light. Like this monitor is a light, right? Everything's a
Yeah.
light. So you're seeing everything bumped up when you take a photo with your phone. It bumps up the light and the brightness. If you watch a film, it's very, very dark. Like when you go to a theater, they really crank that darkness down. But that's actually reality. That's kind of how the world
Yeah.
really is. If we stop to think about it, it's really dark. It really is. There's not
Yeah.
much light out there when you think about it. You know, so that's good that she's able to translate that, because that's like I chase as a painter also, is trying to get that reality in.
Yeah.
Not everything is bright, right? So
It's interesting as well. You're making me think about it there as well, and I think it's a good description there. That there's a good reason that draws me to sort of horror and dark fiction as well. It's because, you know, in real life there's not a lot of light out there, so we create it to make ourselves feel better and to better understand things and to better see things and to interpret them. But the truth is, it's pretty dark out there. I mean, we're a tiny marble in a massive black fucking empty space, really. So, you know, in the grand
we're a
scheme of
spaceship
things,
hurling through the cosmos with fireballs flying around us. You know, it's like, right?
yeah,
So you look up and you go, fuck,
so,
that goes
yeah,
on
I mean,
forever, right?
It's an interesting point, and I think you draw a very interesting distinction there as to why. Yeah, it's very apparent in artwork like that, and I think that's why I think things like this with oil paint on canvas and stuff is so immediate, because a lot of the time Helinka talks about the fact, so we'll go out at night in the middle of the night and we'll take long exposure photographs across a bunch of different exposures so she can get the subject matter that she wants, and then she goes back and makes these paintings. I mean, that one's about a meter and a half or something in size, and she in fact no, that one's about 1 meter by 75, but she goes right up to like 1.5 meters square sometimes. And a lot of the time people are like, well, it's amazing. So she takes a photo, then she does a painting, and when you photograph the painting then looks like the photograph again. And people's like, why don't you just display the photograph? And it's like, well, because there's a certain magic in the process of the handmade and of creating something from what was real and making it a different sort of reality. And so when you have an oil painting on canvas, it's not the same as the camera, because it's not artificial light. There might be 3 or 4 different exposures in that painting that she's drawn on to create this thing that makes a representation of the real that is also not real, but is also not a photograph. And it's a captured moment in time that a lot of human labor has gone into making a thing that's permanent, and that moment exists forever now. You know, there was a snapshot on the camera, that's one thing. The painting's a different thing. So to me, it's a really interesting process, of doing that, and the hours that she'll spend on each of these paintings. So
you see that a lot.
It's a really interesting medium.
I always bang on about like Drew Struzan. I talk a lot about that on this show, right? And the way he painted those actors and actresses on those posters. Like you could set Harrison Ford up like Indiana Jones and take a picture, I'm sure, but you're never going to get that look that he had in those posters by just snapping a photo.
I mean, you look at both of these, the Blade Runner and Enter the Dragon. That's the reason I've got those up, apart from the fact they're two of my favorite films. You look at them both; they're both beautiful painted movie posters.
You can't get that in a camera. You would never get that in a camera.
You could composite that with the actors and it would look like a photographic composite. But you look at these as these painted features, and they've got a vibe, they've got a feel that is you can't capture a different way. That's the magic of the art happening. It's not only the subject. So
yeah, it's fantastic. Do you believe you could couple up with someone who's not an artist, such as you are? Because I do believe that it is paramount to have someone who are art directed as much as you are. I think is one of the main ingredients for the recipe to go right. What do you think about that?
Well, somebody once said, if you want to be a successful writer, marry a merchant banker, because it is really fucking hard to make a living in the arts.
Sure is, buddy. I'm with you.
That's perfect.
There's a lot to be said for that. But equally, while my wife and I will probably never be rich unless, well, we said it before, is that I hopefully we'll get rich because I make a bestseller, because if she ever gets rich, it's probably because she's died. With that artwork actually goes on. But equally, while we might never see great riches, we are both doing what we love. We run the Kung Fu school together, and we get to do these things, which is an incredible privilege. But also we get each other. We understand vibe and the drive, and we sit there sometimes and lament like, what the fuck, why do we do this? And it's like, well, because we can't not do this, and you know, we understand that, we get that, you know. And it's really powerful to have someone in your corner who understands that creative drive, but is also a cheerleader for when those times are grim, you know, and you're like, oh god, this just fell to pieces. Because more often than not, a lot of what we do either just comes to nothing or falls to pieces. So it's great to celebrate those successes and go, wow, look at this, there's this show, there's this art exhibition, or look, this new book came out, fantastic. But in between every one of those are a lot of fuck ups and a lot of things falling down and a lot of things not working and a lot of things all going well, and then doesn't happen. So it's incredibly powerful to have someone in your corner every day who understands that and will help to pick you up when those things knock you down, but also will push you on. No, keep going. You know, don't worry about it. We know it's shit, but keep going, because you know you've had one success, you'll get another. So yeah, I think it's a really useful thing. So I stand out in the rain in the middle of the night and help her take photos, and she laments with me when I don't make award shortlists.
So obviously both of you are doing,
awesome.
or both of you are getting to do what you love full time. What was that moment like when you got to that point in your life when you were able to finally do that?
I'm not really sure that it was particularly a moment. I mean, there's a lot of privilege involved in it. We've been very lucky along the way, because there's I mean, it depends what you consider luck in a way, but when my parents died and left us a bit of money, that helped a lot. I would much rather still have my parents around, but there is a massive privilege in having that sort of buffer that helps you along on those ways. So there's usually something like that that's going on. But equally, we've both been busting our ass for 20 years to build this up. You know, it takes a long time to become a Kung Fu master. It takes a long time to develop the craft and develop the back catalogue of either artwork or writing or whatever that you can build on and keep rolling with. You know, it takes the third Eli Carver book is coming out in November. That'll be my 25th book. That's a lot of work, and that's a lot of grind, basically. And it's the same for my wife. You know, she's been painting. She started taking art seriously when she was in high school, and she went to university and did a master's and everything else, and has been building that reputation. And so it's a process that there isn't really any given moment. You just keep struggling along and doing it anyway because you're just too bloody minded not to, is what it really boils down to. But it is a great thing and a great privilege to be able to do these things now. But there's a lot of other factors involved that allow us to do it. So, you know, we're very lucky.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
What's some advice, like, for someone that, you know, is wanting to eventually make that transition, doing writing full time, or what do you see, I guess, good and bad for somebody that's a starting out writer? Like, what's a common mistake you see? What's something great that you see? I guess I'll do both sides of the coin here.
Well, I think first and foremost, you should never get into writing with the view of doing it in order to become a full-time writer, because for the vast majority of people, we love the teaching Kung Fu and running the Kung Fu school, but we also need to. So on the one hand, very few people actually make a genuine living. I know best-selling writers who also still have day jobs, because it's that difficult to make much of a living, especially if you have a big mortgage to pay and whatever else. I know a handful of writers who are full-time writers, and that's the top sort of percentage of people that have really struck good and got a great audience. But I could count them on one hand, you know, out of all the writers that I know. So you need to do it because you absolutely have the urge to do it, and it's sort of the thing that you can't not do. That's like you need to do this thing. You need that sort of instinct to drive on, because rejection is the default, right? It's a shit job. But I think it's also equally important that even if you do get to a point where you could potentially write full time and make your living at it, I think it's good not to, because otherwise you get to that point where 5 years down the line, you're just writing stories about writers because you don't really know anything else. You don't have that life experience that's going on. So even if I could afford to not run the Kung Fu school, I would still do it, because apart from the fact that it's something else that I love and that I feel has got great value for other people, it's also something that gets me out of here, because I spend a lot of time in this place here.
Yeah.
It gets me out of here, it gets me out in the world, it gets me interacting with other people. And, you know, I would still go out and do stuff even if I was a full-time writer, but I wouldn't have that forced, frequent interaction with other people. And that thing, you know, most of my students are great people. You know, I've got, you know, they're all good people to hang around with, but they're also not the sort of people that you would necessarily naturally just hang out with. And you have a group of friends, but you know, the people you work with, you see a lot of them because you work in the same place. They're not the sort of people you would necessarily have gravitated towards naturally, which means you get to experience a broader cross section of the world. You get to experience a wider variety of people. And that's good for you. That's healthy. You know, it's healthy for your creativity, but it's also just socially healthy. So even if you got to a point where I think if you could write full time, I think it's great to not do that. Even if you only have a job, a part-time job, you do a couple of days a week or a couple of mornings a week, or something that gets you out in the world, mixing with people you wouldn't normally mix with, and something that takes you away from that process, because then that just feeds back into that process. So you get so much more back from it. I think it's important. And I know a couple of people who did get to the point where they could go full time, and then they went, oh, fucking, this is terrible. And they went and got a volunteer position 1 or 2 days a week because they just needed to get out of their head and out of their house, you know. So, yeah.
I watched an interview with Joe Hill where he talked, because he writes comics and horror novels,
Yeah.
and he would talk about how lonely it is to write novels, because like you said, you're in your room, you're doing your thing all day long. You miss that, you know, collaboration or just talking to people. So that makes a lot of sense. He talked about how much he loves doing comics because he's constantly communicating with the artist or the colorist, or, you know, he has that interaction. So
especially with novels, because when you're working in a novel space, it's such a big and sort of encompassing thing that even when you're not working on it and you're with your family or whatever else, your brain is always kind of hooked in to that space until you've got that first draft down. So it tends to kind of take over a section of your brain is just constantly plugged into that novel until the draft is down. And so, yeah, when you're in that sort of space, I think my family have got used to the fact that when I'm working on a bigger book, that I'm a bit less present and available than when I'm working on shorter works or when I'm between works and stuff like that. And that's one of the reasons that I enjoy working with Dave Wood as well. Although, you know, while we write well together and the books are successful and they're good fun, it's also forces both of us to work together on a thing and interact and do stuff together, when otherwise we're just in here, like, you know, in your own brain and in your own space. So yeah, it's really valuable. It's important.
It's really funny you just mentioned that about how wherever you are, it's like in your head. Like, I've made a joke on the show before where my wife will be like, hey, did you remember to get our son a pair of shoes for school, or look up this or look up that, or take the trash out? And I'll be like, nope, but I thought of this really cool scene for the comic I'm writing today. She's like,
it's a bit like that. Sometimes I'm sitting in here and I'm just doing this, and my wife will walk past the door and she'll come to the door, she'll go, oh, sorry, you're working, and she'll go away again. I was sitting there typing away. She'd asked a question, but she sees me doing that, and she's like, okay, and she'll just walk away because she knows that I'm off somewhere. So I'm trying to figure something out. She's like, even if she needed to interrupt, she knows she'd get no sense out of me. So, you know, it's like, yeah, I sort of liken it a little bit to when you're working on those bigger stories. It's like there's this sort of this invisible umbilical that's always connected to that story that you're working on. And depending on the scale of the story, depends on the size of that umbilical and how much of your brain it takes. And the more used to it you get, and the more sort of the more used to the craft you get, the less of your brain space gets taken by that. But there are always times, and especially for me, when I'm nearing the end of a big work, is nearing the end of a novel, that umbilical is kind of fat and it's sucking a lot of brain space away from me. And I've got to the point where I remember to say, you know, look, from my family, I'm sorry, I'm really distracted at the moment. Give me a week or two and I'll be back, kind of thing, because I know I'm at the sharp end of trying to pull all that stuff together. And it just, you can't take it out of your head because you've been living it for such, you know, for a long period of time. I mean, writing books is a weird freaking process. So yeah, it's a bit like that, you know. So, and did you do the grocery shopping? No, sorry.
Yeah.
Alan, there's one question that kind of strikes me now is you have a huge audience through the world. You know, every English-speaking country, and there are so many English speakers, you know, over everywhere. And you're there in Australia, which has a kind of different type of English. Even the way people pronounce words there is slightly different, sometimes not so slightly.
Yeah.
And like you have your own expressions, your own slangs and everything. All right. Like when you write, are you worried about if you going to be understood everywhere? Like if someone there up in Ireland opens your book, do you think that they get a bit confused from time to time? Or you don't really worry about it? Do you think that people just get it because internet is available and they can do their own research, find those things out?
I used to worry about it more than I do now. Like, especially when I wrote The Roo, because that was a bit of a gag, I deliberately wrote that as Australian as possible. I included as many weird Australian colloquialisms and slang as I possibly could. And I put a glossary in the back because I knew people were going to have trouble with it. It's the same with the Gulp. The Gulp has got a glossary in the back of the Australian words that people might stumble over a little bit. And I've actually now added a page on my website that is a glossary. So any of those things, any of those terms in any of the stories, I'm just building that page up as I go, because somebody pointed out to me that it's really difficult to flick to the back of an ebook when you're reading a story. And it's like, well, there's a glossary in the back. And it's like, well, that's actually on my Kindle. That's really hard. So I basically put it on my website as well. And I was like, well, grab your phone and spin it up on there, save you losing your place in your Kindle. So I'm kind of embracing that a little bit more now. But equally, that's partly down to the fact that the world is becoming a bit more globally accepting like that. A lot of my stories are set in the US or in fictional US, or like Devouring Dark is set in London. The Alex Kane series starts in Sydney, but just goes all over the world and then goes to different worlds and back to this one and stuff like that. So it's a bit of a stretch for somebody who will read a story where a guy fights a stone gargoyle and then goes to a forgotten city lost in the void. It's like they'll enjoy that story, but they're like, oh, I didn't understand that word. It's like, well, yeah. So if you can accept all of this and you can process all of that, you can probably process slang in English that's just from a different place. And people do tend to be a lot more accepting of that sort of stuff now. And people like there's Gabino Iglesias writes really good, weird, dark stories, and he's very much proud of his sort of Latin heritage, and he'll frequently put Spanish phrases in his stories with no translation. And it's basically like, well, fuck you, you know, that's how we talk. And that's okay, because you don't lose anything from the story by not understanding that little bit. You don't really miss anything. You still get the whole story. But if you are a Spanish speaker, or if you want to go so far as to look it up, you'll get that little bit more from it. And I think that's a good thing. You know, it's like, well, you know, this is who we are. This is how we speak. In real life, you miss stuff. We don't want to alienate readers, and we don't want to make the reading experience difficult, but we do want to give readers the experience of something else. When you're reading, you do want to be transported. You want your imagination to be fired. You want to be shown things you haven't seen before. And so if I'm writing about a weird harbour town where this strange stuff happens and there's a guy with no nose and a slimy dog and you don't know why, then I'm also going to use the kind of words and language that people in that town would use. So I kind of bridge the gap by making sure I put a glossary in there if people do want to look up what those slang words mean or what those sort of expressions are referring to. But if you don't look them up, you'll still get all of the story. You won't miss anything of the story, but you will get that spice. You will get that flavor of what it sounds like in Australia. The same as if you read Iglesias, you'll get that feel of what it sounds like in the southern states, you know, where there's that lot of diaspora going on. So yeah, I think people are a lot more.
I was gonna say that's first of all, I know we're running up on time here, but it's a good segue because I actually went into your glossary and I wrote down some of my favorites. So I wanted to kind of read them off. I was saying to these guys, man, like the slang you guys have is so much cooler than what we have here in the U.S. It's just it's just so original. The point I wanted to make, though, is if I'm reading a horror novel by an Australian author, I want it to feel authentic. I don't want him to be writing like an American. Like when I'm reading that stuff, I'm like, this is what I want, you know. So, but I want probably my favorite one was we're not here to fuck spiders.
Wait a second. I have to get a beer to listen to it. Just a second, because I need a beer to listen to it.
Okay. Rogeria's a character.
What are you gonna do? Yeah, what are you gonna do? Right?
I think it's important to have that realism. Like it was a long time ago when Train Spotting came out. I don't know if you guys have read that, but the whole thing is written in basically Scottish dialect, and it can be hard work. It can be a difficult thing to read, but it is so of its place. That's the point of it, you know. So yeah, I think it's important, and we're not here to fuck spiders. You're right. That's that's why we've got to do the right thing, mate.
I mean, like, seriously, I'm reading the glossary and I'm like laughing out loud. By the way, I was putting my 3-year-old daughter to bed and I'm sitting there reading them, and obviously I wasn't gonna tell her what I was laughing at. But
do you guys fuck spiders there?
No, we're not here to do that.
Oh man. That basically is just so people watching understand. That's basically saying we're not here to waste our time, right?
Yeah. We're not here to waste time. We're here to get on with the job. So
yeah. Root your boot. That one made me laugh a bit. So if I understand that one correctly,
is to fuck it. So
yeah.
Go and fuck your boot is basically what it means. Yeah, go root your boot. Mate. Get out of here. Not interested.
The get a dog up you. That seriously, I was cracking up reading these, but
that's a classic. I mean, that's been get a dog up you. That's been an Australianism for decades. So don't come the raw prawn with me. And there's all sorts. When I was writing the Roo, I actually put a call out. You'll notice in the front of the Roo it says for Lena. It's dedicated to Lena, and it says for Lena, thanks for your strine, because strine is what is sort of the nickname for Australian slang. Because if you say Australian, strine comes out. So that's what when you're talking and you're using those Australian slang words and colloquialisms, it's called strine. And there's a games developer called Lena van der Venter. She's down in Melbourne. She's a friend of mine. She's a great person. And when I put a call out and I said, hey, hit me with your best Australianisms, I want to include as many as I can in the book. So let me know what's what. And she wrote back to me just these reams of absolute fucking classics. And so she probably had more influence on the slang in the Roo than any other single person, even including me. So that's why I ended up dedicating the book to her, and that's why it says thanks for your strine, because she came up with so many, and not just slang, but just expressions like when you talk about someone, you go, fuck me, that kid was so skinny he has to run around in the shower to get wet. Those kind of sayings are just so good. They're so Australian, and so it was great to include those sorts of things. And that's that. There
was one in the Roo. Yeah, there was one in the Roo where I'll butcher it because I don't have it in front of me, but the body's hanging limp like a flag on a windless day, and I just started laughing. Like I'm like, I don't know if I'm supposed to laugh there, but I could just picture the body just not.
Yeah,
It's great.
Well,
So
it's good, I mean, there's
yeah.
great metaphor in there. So, and when you have a
Yeah.
different culture, when you have a different geography, even, you get different metaphors and similes come through out of that. So, there are things that we would say here that are completely normal to us that might be an environment or something that an American or a British person has never even experienced. So, yeah.
We say wicked a lot, like wicked good,
Yeah.
right? Or all set, right? All set. Wicked
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know where that
I
came
had that a
from.
lot.
Yeah.
When I was growing up in the UK, we would say wicked a lot. That's a London thing. Yeah, wicked in it. But yeah, not so much something we say in Australia.
Wicked good. Yeah, we're nibbling up against our time.
Yeah.
I want one question in. I don't know if you want to keep going. It's up to you. We don't have to wrap, but if you want to, that's cool too. But I wanted to ask,
Yeah, I'm going to need to move on before too long. I'm going to keep working on this book. People want the Gulp.
Yeah,
so,
no worries. We appreciate your time.
I'm here to get what they want.
Just one. Yeah, real quick. I was going to ask, what's your
want to
go-to
hold up the
drink?
Gulp too.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
We're a day late because we were yibber-yabbering, right? So,
Yeah,
what's your go-to drink for like whiskey, bourbon? What's your go-to there?
I'm a single malt man through and through. Very much a fan of Glenfiddich. I can't actually afford it, but my favorite whiskey is the Glenfiddich 21 Rum Reserva. I think that's the best spirit in the world. But even if it's on special here, it's like $250 Australian a bottle. So
Wow.
it's just
So when you get the Netflix, when you get your Netflix deal, that's going to be the party one, right? That's what we're going to crack that open.
Honestly, I said this to my wife one time as well. I got a friend of mine. We did a really big favor for a friend of mine, and he knew I was a big Glenfiddich fan, and he bought me a bottle as a thank you, which was mind blowing. And I said to my wife at the time, I was like, when I get my first big movie option, I'm buying a case of this. So
nice.
Yeah, it's just top. So yeah, that's I mean the Glenfiddich 12, the standard sort of the regular Glenfiddich that's the one I've always got. Yeah, I'm a big fan of a variety of single malt whiskey. I'm not really a blend or a bourbon drinker too much. I like Polish whiskey because my wife's Polish and she introduced me to Polish whiskey, which I discovered is actually way better than the Russian stuff. And there's the one with the bison with the grass in the bottle. It's called Zabrówka, and there's another one called Wyborowa. Those are both fantastic vodkas.
I went to Poland. They never gave me whiskey there. Only vodka.
Yeah, very much.
I missed out.
Yeah, well, the first time I met my wife's family, they tested me, and we drank vodka, and the next day was bad. But
they're fuckers. They're fuckers.
They just put it away, and yeah, it's good. But generally speaking, for my own sake, I'm single malt man. That's my go-to.
I like the Balvenie Caribbean cask finish, 18-year. It's a solid one for Scotch.
I had one of those quite recently, actually. I can't remember why. Oh, there's a bottle shop here called Dan Murphy's, and my in-laws gave me a gift voucher for Dan Murphy's on my last birthday, and I grabbed one of those then, a Balvenie then. That's really good. Yeah,
it's dangerously good. It's very smooth. It's easy to drink.
Very easy to drink. Yeah.
Yeah, 1 or 2 cubes of ice and you're good. So that's solid.
Yeah, that one and the Macallan double cask is another one that's a bit like that. It's just really nice, really smooth, just way too easy to drink. Yeah.
Yes.
I know that one. I know that. Macallan's fucking great.
Macallan's a good one.
Yeah. Perfect. We hit the magic moment here, Mark. I guess, Alan. What's some last words that you want to say, or any books you want to promote, or where can people find you? And I'm rolling your link here at the bottom. But what else you got going on that we can wrap up with, and we'll conclude this out.
Well, by all means, check out the Gulp. That's the latest book. So yeah, that's the one that's sort of doing a lot at the moment. If you go to my website, as you say, you've got it there, alanbaxteronline.com. You can find yes, get into that one. That's the one. But you can find anything. My website's quite extensive now, and there's a page for every book, and you can read a lot of excerpts on there. And also on my website, you'll find links to me on Twitter and YouTube and that sort of stuff. So that's the best place to go. And just follow it out there. If you want to, I'm most active probably on Twitter. I spend way too much time on there. I have a lot of fun with that platform. I block and mute with abandon because there's too many dickheads. But otherwise, when you curate your feed well, it's a really great place to hang out. So I tend to Yeah, spend a lot of time on Twitter.
That's
You'll
where I
find me there.
discovered you. I discovered you on Twitter. That's what made me look into the Gulp. So there you go.
Yeah, well, there you go. And I think that's the case when it comes with writing and with books, and especially with the horror community. There's a really strong sort of Twitter community on there. Like, it seems to, for whatever reason, it seems like with my wife and her artwork, it seems, obviously being visual, Instagram is more the sort of place where those people tend to hang out. But when it comes to writers, it seems Twitter's really a place to hang out with, find other writers and find a lot of readers. It seems to be the case. I have a lot of time for Twitter. It's good fun. But yes, find the books, pick anything you like. I've got a few different things out now, and the third Eli Carver book is coming out in November, which I'm a bit excited about because haven't revealed anything yet. But so Manifest Recall was the first one that came out in 2018, and then Recall Night was the sequel to that, and they're books about this ex-mobster, this ex-hitman who's constantly harangued by a handful of ghosts of people that he's killed in the past. So he's always got these ghosts, just peanut gallery of hate, just giving him shit all the time while he's trying to get through life, and he keeps getting tangled up in these crimes and these weird events that happen. And the third one of those, I've just seen, the publisher's just shown me the draft cover and it looks awesome. And I got a endorsement from one of my favorite authors who was kind enough to read it and said really nice things about it. And all that's just happened in the last week or so. So that's really exciting.
Awesome.
And that's the one that's coming out in November. So that'll be 3 books in that series, 3 short sort of pulp novels, supernatural thrillers. So get into Manifest Recall too, if you like the sound of that, and you'll be on top ready for the new one in November.
The second one just sounded like a really nice comic book.
Well, this is the thing. Again, they're these short sort of pulp novels, so they're really good size for a movie or a graphic novel or whatever. And because I have that real visual sort of influence, and so and these they're sort of, Eli Carver is the main character, and he had a massive, at the very start of Manifest Recall, it starts with him having this huge breakdown and rediscovering who he is, and then going on this sort of mission of vengeance, if you like. So they're really sort of hyper violent. There's loads of gunplay, there's loads of fighting, there's ghosts, there's weird stuff that goes on. So they're short novels. They're very short novels. So they're really kind of high octane, and they lend themselves really well to that sort of movie, TV show, graphic novel sort of format. They would be great to adapt. So yeah.
If you want to make it to the big screen, you have to hit first on the comics. That's the way people are not using comics now. Yeah,
they storyboard for free now, don't they?
Most of the series now, they're based on comics. Like, you have to take the risk first on comics and then apply to it, and then make the big books. Yeah, sooner or later we're going.
I'm sold on that series, though. No, I'm sold on that series. Awesome. I'm excited to read that. So I'll definitely be buying both of those first 2 books for sure.
I know what I'll be doing on Thanksgiving break. I'll be reading that. That's what we'll be doing, right? So, yeah. Well, we appreciate your time tonight, Alan.
When it's out, but it's slated for November. So I think towards the end of November. So Thanksgiving's probably a fair guess. I'm not sure exactly when, but about then.
That's what I'll be doing. I got the week off of work, so I'll be chilling, reading that book. So that's what I'll be up to. So, yeah, we could bang on all day and night about this. So we would definitely love to have you back. When the books come out, we can talk through that if that's something you're open to.
Yeah, sure. Hit me up. Happy to come back. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been great, man. This has been awesome. Yeah. So I definitely appreciate your time tonight. And
thank you very much, Alan.
No worries. Thanks for having me, guys. It's been nice to chat with you.
You're very welcome.
You're a great character.
Thank you. I'm going to roll the outro here. You're welcome to hang for a few minutes after, but I appreciate everybody tuning in tonight. I hope you guys have a great evening. Thanks again, and I hope everybody stays livid.